Jury selection. What is voir dire?
Voir dire means to speak the truth. And they want you to answer truthfully when they ask you these questions. And they'll ask you questions, you won't know this at the time, but let's say it's a marijuana case. They're going to say, have any of your friends ever been arrested, or anybody in your family ever been arrested for marijuana possession? And you may say, no, because that's the truth. And then they'll say, do you feel that marijuana laws in this country are fair? And if you say, I think they're really stupid and I don't think the government has any business telling people what they can do with their own bodies, they're going to dismiss you immediately. The prosecutor is going to dismiss you. He'll be very nice. He'll say, thank you for coming. You're dismissed. Or the judge may even say, thank you for coming. You're dismissed. If you say, well, I know we have marijuana laws. I guess I've never really thought about it. They'll say, okay, maybe she's our girl because she's really not prejudiced. If on the other hand you say, anybody who's caught with marijuana should immediately be put in jail for 5 years, the defense attorney or the judge, or both, again will say, thank you very much for showing up, you're dismissed. They don't want you to come in with a lot of preconceived notions about a case that you may be sitting in judgment about.
What kind of questions will I be asked as a juror?
When you show up for jury duty, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. And again, they may have a form that they sent you in the mail that you've had to fill out already. But even if they haven't, they're going to ask you questions to find out how you think and who you are and what your prejudices are and what your experiences are in your life. So they're going to ask you a lot of questions to try to make sure that you're a fair witness, or they're going to try to make sure that you're a fair juror, and they're also going to ask you questions to make sure you're the kind of juror they think they can convince of their arguments.
Why do I have to answer personal questions before I'm chosen for jury duty?
Often when you're called for jury duty, they're going to ask you a lot of personal questions that you might not want to answer, especially in front of other people whom you do or do not know. And actually, sometimes you can ask to answer those in front of the judge. You can write a note and say, I'd like to answer those, in chambers with the judge and the attorney's not in. But they ask you personal questions for a reason. He may have hit someone, we don't know. So they want to make sure that you have no prejudices, and they'll ask you a variety of questions, obviously depending on the kind of case it is, to see if they think you can be a fair juror.
What are peremptory challenges?
And a peremptory challenge means that they don't have to give any reason. They don't even have to ask you any questions. They can just look at you and say, thank you for coming today, you're dismissed. And they may do that because you look impatient, angry, because they know by looking at you, you're the wrong age, you're the wrong color, you're the wrong sex, that you don't fit the profile of jurors they want. And they can't be called on that. The other person doesn't get a chance to ask you questions. You're just dismissed.
Are there restrictions on peremptory challenges?
There are some restrictions on peremptory challenges. First of all, you only get a certain number of them. And if a pattern emerges, let's say, for instance, if there's a Native American kid on trial, and from a community that is, say, 30% Native American, and the prosecutor is dismissing every Native American who's in the jury pool, the judge may actually say, whoa, we need to go into chambers and talk about this.
What could happen if I lied during jury selection?
While you're talking during this period of voir dire, when they're asking you all the questions to decide whether or not you're going to be on the jury or whether they're going to let you go home or send you home and you're not going to get an opportunity for this experience, you should always tell the truth. If you're uncomfortable, you can always ask to go answer these questions in the judge's chambers, but you should not ever lie. If you lie during that process and you get seated on the jury and for some reason they think that you have come into this case, let's say that you actually were convicted of a DUI, for instance, and there's a DUI case and they ask you if you've ever been convicted of a DUI and you said no, that's a lie, because you may have a prejudice in that case because of your own experience, which you're going to carry into the jury deliberation room. So don't lie during the process. If you're embarrassed, ask to speak to the judge and the attorneys in chambers, but do not lie.
Do I have to answer questions about my religion during jury selection?
If you're called in for jury selection and there's a case that has a religious component, let's say, I'm trying to think of a good one here, let's say that somebody belonged to a church that, for instance, did not allow its children to receive any medical treatment and they're charged with neglect. They may ask you if you've ever heard of that particular religion, if anybody in your family belongs to that religion, if you belong to that religion. And I think that those would be valid questions, because they would probably prefer not to have people who either thought the religion was cuckoo or people who were devout members of that religion, either one, from the different sides of the people involved in the trial.
Can a potential juror refuse to answer questions?
This is an interesting problem. There have been successful challenges by people from the jury pool where they have said, you have no right to invade my privacy in that way, and I do not have to answer these questions to be qualified to serve on a jury. It's none of your business whether or not I've ever been divorced, or it's none of your business whether or not I ever had a child out of wedlock, or it's none of your business if my spouse ever hit me. And in most instances, jurors have been successful in those arguments, but I would encourage you, if you're asked questions that you think are too personal or embarrassing, that you ask the judge if you can answer the question in chambers, just because it makes it a lot easier for the whole process to go along. But I think that you have a right as a person to a private life, and if you really feel that these questions are an invasion of your privacy, you should say that. I feel these questions are an invasion of my privacy. I'm not comfortable answering them, and they'll probably send you home, but at least you will have protected your own human right to privacy, and you're to be commended for that.
Will I get paid for serving on a jury?
When you're called in to serve on jury duty, they usually send you on the summons. There'll be a little note on there that say, we will reimburse you up to $7.50 for parking. You may get $8.35 for lunch expenses if you're held over during lunch, and you will receive, you fill out the attached form or the attached sheet and leave it with the bailiff or with the clerk of courts, and we will send you your, these expenses plus your payment of $15 or $25 a day, and it's usually not very much, unfortunately. I hope you have a good employer who's going to pay you for your day or two off.
Do companies have to pay their employees during jury duty?
There are some laws in this country about jurors getting paid when they're called for jury duty. We did a survey a few years ago, and we found that most employers pay an average of about 75% of the standard rate of pay to their employees if they're out for several days. If they're out for a couple days, they usually pay them in full. There are only a couple of states that have the same laws governing payments to jurors as they have governing payments to people called, let's say, to go to National Guard or something like that. Their employers can't penalize them for that. But in most instances, if you're going to serve on a jury, your employer is going to pay you anyway. But in most states, they're not required to, but often the employers will call us and we will say, yes, you should pay them, even if it isn't the law in your state, and they do.
What are pre-trial juror investigations?
Sometimes when you're called in to a jury pool, you will get with the summons not just your form for reimbursement of expenses, but you may get a questionnaire that can go on for several pages with all kinds of questions about your educational level, how long you've been married, if you've ever been married, whether or not you've ever been in the armed forces, if you've ever been convicted for a variety of things. And this is a pretrial investigation of jurors, and these are often handed over to jury experts who try to determine the profile of everybody in the jury pool to help them select jurors they think would be better for one side of the case or the other side of the case, depending upon who the juror consultant is. When you're called for jury duty and you get a questionnaire that you have to fill out, that is supposed to be information that's confidential. It should not go to the press or the public. It can go to the attorneys involved in the case, and it can go to the judge. The clerk of courts may see that, but that information should not be made public. It may be used to investigate you if there's a concern that it's a special kind of case, but never in any instance should even your name be made public. Okay? And sometimes jurors are given numbers. Their name is never disclosed. Usually it's not the kind of case where you're worried about them knowing your name. But juror privacy, by and large, is always protected. Even though you may be investigated, none of that information is going to be made public.
What if I end up serving on a grand jury?
Sometimes, instead of being called to serve on a regular petit jury in a criminal case, you may be called to serve on a grand jury, which is a different function. There'll be more people on the grand jury, for one thing, and you're called in to look at evidence and look at allegations that are going to be presented by a prosecuting attorney or a state's attorney general to decide whether or not there is an adequate reason to believe, if there's reasonable evidence and reasonable suspicion that someone may have committed a crime and should therefore go to trial. So you're not judging guilt or innocence, you're just saying this looks like a valid case.